So I think the first act of courage is just acknowledging that you can have better than the roller coaster. And my learning and what I see is we don't have to figure out how. Like, it starts with that acknowledgement, that starts with you, but then getting off the roller coaster doesn't end with you.
Hi there, I'm Bex Craig and you're listening to the Not Just Anything podcast for women who want it whole. I hope you'll join me each week as we hear real stories from real women about how they've curated a whole life by design rather than by default. Today I'm talking to the energetic Melissa McGowan based in Melbourne, Australia. Melissa is an experienced talent leader and now entrepreneur who's on a mission to help people become their own chief energy officer. Having lived all over the world and experiencing what she describes as her own energy crisis, Melissa is focused on supporting leaders and individuals tap into their energy resources that allow them to feel truly alive and ultimately thrive. I hope you enjoy our conversation. A really, really big welcome to Melissa McGowan, who's joining me today from Australia. How are you?
I'm really well.
Obviously, when we connected, I felt a huge amount of synergy between what you talk to people about, obviously also on your podcast, not to steal your thunder at all, but and I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that with our listeners. So usually I just get started with the big question, but an important one, which is, how would you describe yourself or the culmination of things that have made you the person that you are today?
I guess, where I am today is very different than where I've been in the past, but it's definitely an outcome of my personal journey as a leader, as a mother, and, all the experiences I've had in there, which I can touch on in a minute, but also having supported thousands of people that I've kind of coached and developed in business in the US, the UK and Australia, and just seeing what they've struggled with, over the years. Which really finally gets to me stepping away from my in-house people and culture leadership role last year to set up my own practice mid-COVID and a podcast, like you said, initially from my wardrobe where I was hiding from my children. So all of that has kind of, come together. So I guess essentially I'm now a leadership coach, but what I'm most obsessed with, I think, is helping more leaders, specifically females, become what I call their own chief energy officers. I think my experience and working with all those leaders, we all know how draining it is when you're working hard and you just feel like there's never enough time. Like there's just not enough time for yourself. There's not enough time to get it all done. And so that's what I'm on a mission for, like really to kind of teach women and dynamic leaders, how to optimize not just their time, their capacity, but really their energy as a real foundation to supercharge them to be able to deliver the goods at work and have mojo, and that's my mission. Is like, so often we have one or the other. And, I really believe that my experience has shown me through the contrast of challenges as well, that we can have both if we're willing to be brave enough and give ourselves permission to prioritize our vitality and our energy and our vibe and how we feel. And then over time, recognizing that actually can be a powerful source for us to do more, as women, rather than feel like, we have to settle or tolerate things, whether they're, things like being in the wrong job or issues around health or feeling like, we can't follow our dreams. So that's kind of my mission these days.
Yeah, you can feel it. And it's funny that you talk about energy because you have a vitality. I mean, I'm sure people tell you this all the time, but like you can feel your energy, and you use the word vitality and energy and mojo and vibe and all of these things. And so you keep referencing that this is kind of a culmination of your experience and seeing what this does for people. So how did you come to this conclusion that this should be your kind of mission, the thing that you want to really activate for people or help people figure out?
Yeah, it's so interesting because making a big, brave decision for me actually this time last year has been the real catalyst, if you like. So I was part of a masterclass with a group of women, a global group of women actually, and it was probably something I was too slow to. I'm a big believer that we all need support. And I think because I was in people and culture and I was a coach, I kind of thought I should be able to figure this whole growth thing out myself. I don't need any help. Well, I probably got stuck there whirring around for a few years, knowing in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something different. And the next obvious thing was to go and get another big job somewhere, and I was the breadwinner per se in our house, right? So we'd lived in different countries. My husband had been at home for a period of time. So I think there was just a lot of stories running about what I could and couldn't do. So being part of this masterclass and investing in my own growth was huge. And, you talk about finding a tribe that kind of lifts you up and challenges you. And I was in Detroit this time last year with that group of women, and we were doing a series of sort of development workshops. And one of the questions was, if you were being really brave this year, what would you do? And I think because I wasn't on a work trip, I was overseas on my own as opposed to just, working and whatever, it gave me the space to actually think a little bit differently. I'm going to resign from my job without knowing exactly what I'm going to do. Yes, I might do some consulting or whatever, but I'm going to actually create some space after, 20 years of going hard and moving countries and having 4 kids, including twins and all of this. And so I kind of came home, and on the plane even, things just started falling out, like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. It's going to be called Go to Grow, because I believe that where you go with your energy and your time, your money is where you actually grow. So it all started. And then it took standing in my office at the calendar. I had like the whole 12 months of the year mapped out, the one year that we didn't end up even needing to, really use the calendar again. But it was all this sort of balancing of, financial factors, lifestyle factors, me and my health and well-being and all of that stuff. Anyway, we made the decision right then and there that I'm going to resign from my job and take the big risk and the big leap. Of course, then COVID hit and I stuck to my guns, but I spent the next few months in crisis management, with sort of 1,400 employees across Australia Pacific. So it was later in the year when I was able to actually stand back and synthesize the big learnings I've had personally and in business over all that time. And it really came down to probably 2 things. My biggest leadership lesson that I've had, what I call my big energy aha, is now what I can so clearly see was a real energy crisis that I had in my early 40s. And it came from a number of good things and a number of challenging things, just layering up. So if I just go back a little bit, my undergrad was in science and physical education. I was always into movement, worked in the fitness industry for a while, went and lived in London for 5 years and traveled. But I fell into business when I was over there and working in a business, and someone she was sort of head of HR in a big company. She gave me some opportunities to run some projects. I came back to Australia and was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to do some more in that area. So I did a postgrad in business and human resources. Started having kids, and, I worked for a company that just one of those companies that every time I got even slightly comfortable, they were just constantly saying, hey, how about this? How about a cross-functional move? No, how about you go overseas? So we were up for the going overseas. Unfortunately, we lost a baby halfway through a pregnancy after my first child, before our second. And that was a really kind of challenging time. And I nearly sort of stepped right away then, because I was finding it, really challenging to sort of get back into work. I was given a lot of space and flexibility. It was great. And they said, okay, no pressure on going overseas. Wait till, you're ready. So we had another child. Then we went to the US, which was amazing. Over there, of course, when everything was so much more relaxed in some ways, although it was very dynamic in the role I was in, my husband was like, I don't know about having any more kids. Like, it was so stressful last time and all of that. Anyway, of course, we fell pregnant with twins the first month we were trying, and twins run in my family. So, we came back to Australia earlier than we intended. And all these good things were happening, like having twins. I then, got a big promotion at work. Then I got poached by another company a year later. So it was all good. But, I was traveling globally probably 4 or 5 times a year. I had undiagnosed celiac, so I was spending a lot of money going to health retreats and all sorts of different doctors, and, oh, you've got IBS and blah, blah, blah. So I found out I was celiac and pretty depleted. And I think at that point I'd really normalized a high level of stress. So just because I felt like I was coping with it my body was starting to give me signals that that's not really the case. Yet I still had this story running, right? Like, I'm the breadwinner. I'm the only female on an exec team with 6 men. It's like a highly responsive environment. You know, people get on 6 a.m. flights and get up at 4 a.m. and all this sort of stuff. And I was always sort of finding ways to hold boundaries and try and create more flexibility and change in the organisation. But I think it just took its toll. And in the end, I started experiencing, well, what I now know were hot flushes. So if I go back about sort of 3.5, 4 years ago, we were in the north of Australia in Queensland, and it was really warm, but I was having these sort of sweat that I'd never experienced before.
Mm.
But I thought I'd had a cold and it was like a post-viral thing. Like, I literally had no idea. And it wasn't until I went back and then, you know, more doctors, more tests, all this sort of stuff. And they said, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, Melissa, but you are menopausal. Like, you're through perimenopause and you're actually menopausal. Like, the shop is shut. Luckily, we didn't want to have any more kids. But, you know, I'd been dealing with some of the symptoms of menopause for probably 2 years without knowing. So the exhaustion, like, it's you know, it was awful. So all of that, you know, combined really helped me learn that energy is just everything. Like, it is our greatest resource. And I sort of slowly started digging out of that. And I developed a different way of working and approaching my weeks with not just time in mind to get, you know, the most important stuff done, but energy at the top of the list, meaning what are the things that I can do either at work or outside of work that give me energy? And I'm not just squeezing that in at the end of the day, like, okay, I'll go for a walk if I can fit it in, or let me look where all these meetings are and how can I jam something in around that or not. It's actually prioritizing that as the foundation. So that was my big personal aha. So I'll stop there because, you know, as you can see, I could go on all day.
You know, no, I wasn't thinking that at all. I was just thinking there's so much passion for this. You can feel it as you're talking. And I'm really grateful for the way that you describe that in your own life, because it allows us to kind of see how this can show up. And you're absolutely so spot on. I mean, I see this in my work as well. You describe your own energy crisis, but when we look about now, we are in some sort of major energy crisis, I would say, and, you know, the world's professionals all over the place in all sorts of different roles. And, you know, a lot of people are talking a lot about a burnout effect and lots and lots of articles about mental health at the moment for people. And I just think it's right where you're pointing us to, which is like, how are you taking charge of your energy? I talk about it in the sense of, what are the things that make you feel whole, make you feel like yourself, that light you up? And because that in itself is a form of energy. When you describe these things that deplete your energy, these are things that you feel that you should be doing, or that are expected of you in a way, or that we've been conditioned to from society or whatever. But there is also this, I love that you describe it. It's like, one is very reactive. Oh, well, hang on. How do I fix my energy? Oh, that's how I do it. Or I go and do yoga for 45 minutes a week, or I go for a run. The alternative is to really look at your life and say, wait a minute, where do I come to life? How do I create this vitality that you describe, so that all the things that I'm eager to do, that make me feel myself? So I'm so inspired. And so in the work that you're doing now, in this journey, what is the difference? What is the palpable difference that people can expect when they start to manage their energy more effectively, when they start to become their own chief energy officer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it plays out different ways because I see different things with different clients. And I guess what I would say is that for a lot of people, it's a bit of a leap of faith. Like, you and I are converts, right? Because we've experienced it. And we just take little actions often, and it builds momentum and confidence over time. Because I think, you know, this feeling of like needing to please others and look after everyone else, the one of the personalities of the inner critic, the pleaser, can have us feel like, yes, it's very logical, it's common sense that we need to look after ourselves, but, you know, there's all these reasons why we're not. They're often to do with others. And so I think what I find is confidence builds when you just step into like, what is the smallest action that I can take and build a habit on to like habitually prioritize my energy, like you say, in a more proactive way, not the reactive way. And what I, do for myself around that and what I, teach other women to do is sort of this concept of energy, then action. And I think for so long we're like, okay, we're going to take the action and we're going to get shit done. And then if we've got something left in the tank, happy days. And it's sort of like, how do we flip that and just do something small and achievable, which might even be repurposing something that we already do, just with the science even shows that just even the intention, right, to slow down a little bit can really move the needle. So I think increased feeling of spaciousness and confidence, but absolutely performance, because, as someone who's worked in business, I'm also really passionate about the link between feeling achievement and then that being energizing. And so, what we know there is like not everything is important. So how do we figure out what is most important so that we're achieving in our weeks? Like we're never all going to get it all done. So what is kind of the high leverage action? So that's kind of how I think about it is, what are the couple of things that I can do this week to move the needle on my business or, the project I'm trying to do at work, or even in my home, right? To make things, feel connected and spacious in my home, whatever it is. Like, what's just a couple of things? And then each week, what are a couple of those things that really energize me? And which is why, personal goals or having some stuff outside of work is important. And, I picked up Danielle Laporte's book. I first bought her book back in like 2012. And she is the one who talks about the best way to simplify life is to get clear on how you want to feel and then do more things to feel that way more often. It's kind of two things. It is our capacity to do work in the physics sense. We use it, we transfer it, when we do work or whatever, but it also is how we feel. Right? It's how we show up. And so if we get clear that actually what's important to us is not nailing that goal, it's nailing that goal so that we feel a sense of confidence, so that we feel connected to the team we're working with or whatever it is. And in our lives, like that's why I always ask people in my podcast when they feel alive, because feeling alive or whole, as you say, is often what we're really chasing. So she talks about that being like a way to radically simplify your life. So that's how I often think about it, is like, what's your intention with your energy? And then what's one thing? So if I want to feel alive, what's one thing I might do this week? Well, I might go swimming, and this is what I did last year in winter, with a couple of women when we were in lockdown, when it was freezing cold in the water, and just get in the water for 5 minutes and be like numb and ridiculously cold and feel alive, because what else can you think about in that moment other than being really present in the moment? So how do you want to feel? Do more things that feel that way, and then you will get the rewards and the confidence that it's okay to do this over time. But we've got to start small. We often try and do too much too soon.
Oh, so it's yes. I just completely agree with everything you just said. And I think it's so right. What can happen is we get really enthused about something and then it just feels so big and so beyond us. And as you describe, it's not just anything, as we talk about on this podcast, but it is about small incremental steps towards that. And I love that you describe it as what makes you feel alive. And it's funny because I always think about this as the difference between listening to our cerebral information that's coming in versus listening to everything else that could inform. We talk about nonverbal communication as being much greater than our verbal communication.
Yes.
And yet when it comes to ourselves, quite often we kind of forget that there's a lot more that we could learn and listen to outside of just what's happening in our head. And yet I guess we've all been kind of trained to be far more like, oh, well, what do you think about that? Or can I analyze that or whatever? And what I'm loving what you're saying is that actually it's not about fighting the fact that you might not have the best of energy on that day or whatever emotion it is, but it's actually about coming up with ways that you can either harness that energy or learn from that energy or expend that energy or whatever it might be, like, doing the burpees. I think this is actually a really fundamental part about it, just learning to listen to your energy.
Yeah, I think that it becomes a bit of a language in your home or your team, and you can just be intentional about it. I mean, it really dovetails into a bit of emotional intelligence, doesn't it? Like, name it to tame it, right? Like, I'm feeling whatever, and just being a bit more intentional about it, because with that awareness, we start to have choices. I guess that's what we're saying here, isn't it? Like, it starts with awareness, and then we have choices, and we're not going to nail it every time. But as we continue to practice that and feel the difference, I think those rewards will keep us going.
And so let's imagine for a second, like, all the world become their own chief energy officers. We've got leaders that are stepping into that, children, parents, communities, whatever, whoever we're talking to. And we cast our eye out and everyone's, what is possible or what is created as a result of that in your mind?
I guess, when I talk about leadership and life equals life, like, I just haven't ever bought into this idea of, like, there's work and there's life. I just think there's life. And I think that this can help us all do life better in the context of the work we're doing and our purpose and whatever that is in organizations, and just really respecting that. So I'm going to link that back to, again, inclusion, because if people have the tools and the permission and the ownership to really look after themselves and see what that unlocks in them, then I believe people won't be forced with having to make decisions like, can I do this? Like, can I be a manager and a mum? Or, can I really start my own business? And I believe we can do both if there's a respect that what we're talking about here is that we are managing our lives, not just our work, and the energy and capacity spans across both. So when we think about whatever buckets are important for us, that's really the goal here, is that if we can know what those buckets are for ourselves, which is different for everyone, and that we have ways of being aligned and with those buckets without it killing us, then I think we're just going to find a whole lot more ease and mojo. Yeah.
I mean, I think this is fantastic, and I just love what you're saying. And I'm wondering what needs to happen systemically, like institutionally in our organizations, to start to turn this ship, because I love what you said, life equals life. I have said so many times on this podcast, I completely rail against this idea of work-life balance, work-life anything, because as you've just described, work is a part, it's a dimension that sits within our life. And as you've also described, it may or may not, but usually there's lots of things that comprise that. And so sticking life, which is supposed to be everything else, and work on this kind of scale is just, for me, it's incredibly archaic way of thinking about it. It's very limiting. So I love this idea of, like, life is life. And yet, as I know, even as I say these things to people, there's still a lot that needs to happen for organizations, for the systems that support individuals moving more towards that space to kind of come on this journey. So in your mind, what needs to happen? What's the future of work, or what's the future that these systems and organizations need to consider?
I mean, what I'm going to say is there are some really positive signs. So, changing a system, as we know, is huge. Mm-hmm. But as we look at the system within organizations and how that evolves as leadership shifts and becomes more progressive, and I look around and I know organizations that are led by leaders who are peers of mine, who have got young families, who have got dynamic lives, who may be in dual career families, and they are getting braver and more courageous at acknowledging how this is for them in their lives, because I think our own experience is really such a gateway here, isn't it? So I'm seeing organisations who are not just reacting because of COVID and suddenly running another resilience webinar and, putting a fruit bowl out. Like, they're genuinely stepping into what is the win-win here. And the data, again, shows this is the case, is that if we can support our employees with life, that we are going to see less mental health issues, more wellness, and better performance. That is cultural in an organisation, and that is changing. And there are some examples around of where that's happening. I think it requires a more modern leadership, and I think it requires courage, because we're not going to have permission to do this all of a sudden. So yeah, I'm hopeful, because I see leaders stepping up. I see women questioning, okay, I was doing this because I thought I had to, and now I'm putting my hand up and saying, you know what, I think there's got to be a different way. But I think it's going to take time. And I just encourage people, when they are thinking about what organisations they go to, or, you know, what they want to be part of, is like how they can get a better sense of, you know, what that tribe is like already in terms of the current behaviours and values, and how can we become part of tribes that are already operating and behaving in ways that are going to be aligned enough for us to feel like we're supported to do great work and live our lives and have mojo and not have to choose between one or the other.
It's so true that finding that sort of values alignment. And also I love the way that you talk about this so optimistically. I share the same optimism about, you know, where we're at. And throughout this conversation, there's been a sort of a theme around courage. And you talked about your own brave, you know, like what would it look like if it was really brave? And Sheryl Sandberg and Facebook have their famous, you know, what would you do if you weren't afraid phrase that they use. And there's this tone, both as an individual that you've described, of your bravery, of your courage, of stepping beyond, sort of outside of your comfort zone, but also the same for the leaders that you're working with, for the organizations to really take that leap. And so I'm just getting curious, like, maybe I'll ask it to you as an individual, but how have you strengthened your own courage and bravery to take some of these bold steps?
Oh, look, to be honest, it's vulnerable, you know, because in many ways for me, playing safe was staying in an organisation and doing the same stuff, because you're part of a bigger system. You know, it's a whole different thing. So, you know, I wouldn't be being transparent if I didn't say, you know, setting up your own business, and even though it can be very purpose-driven, it's early days for me. I have not experienced this much growth and learning for years as I have in the last year. You know, so this is like a weekly thing of courage and feeling alive and aligned. And I think that's another silver lining of menopause for women, is like, whoa, okay, what does sort of like, I've got all this wisdom and experience, like how can I empower myself through this next stage of life and actually have a different impact? So it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's this idea of like, you know, I probably am playing a bit bigger. And I think that thread for me in my life around, on balance, I've always chosen growth. Like whether it was back when I was helping other people get fit, when I was kind of traveling the world and doing different adventures, or helping people make shifts and movement in their own, you know, behavior or emotional well-being, you know, that has been a theme for me. And as I look at it, that's kind of been how I've lived as well. It's sort of like one of those, you know, whack-a-mole things where, you know, you can knock me down and then I just kind of pop back up again. It's ridiculous. But it doesn't come without, you know, what is like Brene Brown. It's like, it's like vulnerable doesn't mean that it's comfortable, right? It's highly uncomfortable, as we know.
Yeah, it is uncomfortable, and yet here you are doing it. And so I'm just curious for people that are sitting there, because a lot of people that listen, and a lot of people that I work with, and just frankly, I mean, I resonate with this myself. It is easier to stay somewhere that you know. I mean, there's a lot of comfort in these things, and yet, as you've described in your own story, when you start to listen, you said playing bigger, all of that sort of thing, it contributes so much to the impact that you can make, as you've just said, to the lives of people around you, to your family, etc. And so I just practically, what do you say to yourself on those days where you are feeling a bit uncomfortable, where you are having these learning, you know, Brené Brown talks about FFTs, fucking first times, and
butt clench moments. I mean, there's a lot of those. So I think two things are just etched into me now, like that progress, not perfection. because when you're learning new stuff and running your own business, like that whole imperfect, messy action, and that's what I explore on my podcast, is the sort of messy, real, growth. But that progress, not perfection, has just got to be a mantra for me. And I've learned more and more about, yes, we have the inner critic, but there's also external critics. So sometimes, like, who we share thoughts in draft or business ideas we have, or, is this even possible for me? Or, oh, gee, I'd like to maybe do that. I have a lot of clients who say, I've always sort of thought about that, or there's a creative thing they want to look into. It's like, we can share those things with people and get back some pretty unhelpful responses, so I'm learning on that one as well, because we're dealing with our own inner critics. The last thing we need is external critics. And then I think this energy, then action, that is like my guiding thing. So I feel way less confident if I am not looking after myself. Like, it's like I've had to double down on that because I've made this change. I guess what I would leave us with, with others, if women listening are on that roller coaster, and there's a pattern around, like, it's up and it's down and it's okay. No, I'm really good. Oh my God, I'm really struggling. Like, others notice that. You're tolerating it. It impacts your energy. It impacts, we respond to each other's energy. Like you deserve better than that. And if we continue to kind of ruminate around in tolerating that, our body is going to inevitably tell us that that's not okay for us. So I think the first act of courage is just acknowledging that you can have better than the roller coaster. And my learning and what I see is, we don't have to figure out how. Like, it starts with that acknowledgement, that starts with you, but then getting off the roller coaster doesn't end with you. And, it's just little support over time. And I think, you're a coach too, Bex. You know what I mean? It's like, it's little building blocks over time. It's not like drastic change in a week. It's a process over time with support and a bit of accountability, and that builds momentum and confidence.
I mean, I just think that's a perfect place for us really to end the conversation, because I think it's such an empowering thing, as you said, to even just get to a place where you say, actually, I'm worth more than what I'm putting myself through. Because although I can blame all the sorts of things that are around me right now, I'm also letting this happen. I'm going to be more at choice. And first step is just to say, I'm worth more.
Totally. And my kids noticed the difference when I finally invested in my, growth a few years ago. My husband was umming and ahhing, like, oh, it's a lot of money. And it was. And then, I asked him a year ago, I said, what do you think now? He's like, oh, I wish you'd done that sooner. So, if you're not going to do it for yourself, ladies, like, do it for the other important people in your lives.
Yeah. I mean, it is so unhelpful that we think of these things as being selfish, or about, purely about ourselves. It is so in service of ourselves, and that has an effect on the people around us. I mean, I feel your energy. I can feel your passion for it. I'm really excited for the work that you're doing. And I'm so pleased that you're able to share some of your amazing mantras and philosophies that are straightforward and easy for us to hold on to, but still, I can imagine, incredibly powerful and impactful. So really, really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been great. I've loved this chat, and I look forward to having you on my podcast. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Not Just Anything for Women Who Want It Whole. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to our weekly podcast and leave us a review. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here with us, and we look forward to having you join again. And remember, be brave, be whole, be you.